All righty. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be with you right now, and I'm grateful to be in this conversation. First, a little bit of background on me. So my grandpa founded an ice cream company. It's called Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. And my dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. He was groomed from his early childhood to one day join in running the family company. But when he was in his early 20s, he was offered that chance and he said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to, as we jokingly say in our family, follow his own rocky road. And he ended up moving with my mom to a little island off the coast of Canada where they built a one-room log cabin. They grew most of their own food. They practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day. And they named their kid Ocean. That's me, of course. And they almost named me Kale. This was back before kale was cool. But we did eat a lot of kale and carrots and cabbage and other veggies from the garden. When I got a little older, we moved to California. My dad researched the food industry in which he'd grown up, and he ended up coming out with a best-selling book called Diet for a New America. It inspired millions of people to look at their food choices as a chance to make a difference in the world. The media had a lot of fun with the story. They called him the rebel without a cone. Now, as fate would have it, one of his readers ended up being my grandpa, Irvin Robbins. Now, my dad's uncle, Bert Baskin, the other co-founder of the ice cream company, had died of heart disease at the age of 54. And, my dad's uncle, Bert, always ate a lot of ice cream. One ice cream cone is not going to kill anybody, but we do see the data that ice cream isn't good for your heart. Bottom line is he died, and I never knew him. He was gone before I was born. I just know about him from stories. But my grandpa at around age 70 was facing serious heart problems himself, as well as type 2 diabetes and weight issues. He too ate lots of ice cream, and he'd always eaten the standard American diet. But his doctors gave him a copy of my dad's book and told him to read it. And my grandpa did. And he ended up eating a lot more fruits and vegetables and whole plant foods, eating way less meat and animal products, giving up sugar, and even giving up ice cream. And he got results. He reversed his diabetes. He reversed his heart disease. He got off a whole bunch of drugs he didn't need. He lost a bunch of weight. His golf game improved 7 strokes. So my grandpa Irv wound up living another 19 more healthy years. And he credited my dad's work with essentially saving his life. So here he was, this one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history, who had manufactured and sold more ice cream than any human who had ever lived, giving up ice cream, listening to his renegade son and making changes and getting incredible results. And I'll be honest with you, if he could make changes, I mean, he was one stubborn cookie, and he was not the type to just go with the flow. And here he was making these changes and getting these results. And if he could make changes like that, then I think there's hope for the rest of us too. So in my own journey, when I was 16, inspired in part by my grandfather's and my dad's legacy of leadership and my own desire to make a positive contribution, I founded a nonprofit. It was called Yes. And we worked with young leaders in over 65 countries around the world, spoke in person to school assemblies, and then organized leadership training events around the planet. And as I worked with leaders all over the globe, I saw that everybody eats, and that what we're eating is having this huge impact. And all over the world, KFC, McDonald's, Baskin Robbins are spreading. The American way of growing food with factory farms and pesticides and hormones and antibiotics and GMOs is spreading. The ways of processing food, manufacturing food, selling food are spreading. And in this process, waistlines are expanding. Hospitals are filling up. People are getting sick with diseases that were unheard of a generation or two ago. The United States, which has kind of been the central leader of the modern industrialized diet, has a 72% rate of overweight or obesity. Statistically, you're unusual. You're almost weird if you're just a healthy body weight in the United States, because overweight and obesity, no, but they don't have to be. They may be typical, but they don't have to be normal. We have an epidemic of disease in the US and around the world. And the names are things like heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disorders, and of course, obesity. And the truth is that these diseases are in many ways and in many cases symptoms. They are not causes of death. They are symptoms. If you drive your car into a brick wall, your death certificate might say impalement by brick wall. But you know and I know that the real cause of death was bad driving. And similarly, if you eat the standard American diet, you will get the standard American diseases. And there's a pretty good chance you will die the standard American death, which means epidemic rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, etc. These are the major causes of death in the industrialized world. The good news is they are preventable in the vast majority of cases. The Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation conducts a study called the Global Burden of Disease. Every year they look at what's killing people and why, and they look at what can be done about it. And they have dozens and dozens of researchers. They analyze a lot of data, and their bottom line conclusion in their most recent report was that the modern diet was the primary driver of 672,000 deaths in the United States alone last year, more than 10 million worldwide in 1 year. This means that in the US, more people are dying because of diet-caused disease than died in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, Korean War, both Iraq wars, Afghanistan war combined. But this time the enemy isn't another country, it's not guns and bombs, it's our own knives and forks and what we're doing with it. Now we're in the time of COVID-19, and we're in a time when a lot of people are scared about this virus. And it's worth noting that even in 2020, vastly more people will die in the United States from lifestyle-induced chronic illness than from COVID. And it's even worse than that, because most of the deaths with COVID-19 come with comorbidities. In fact, according to one study, 94% of the deaths in the United States from COVID have been attached to a comorbidity. So if you have heart disease, if you have cancer, if you have diabetes, if you are overweight, if you have asthma, then your risk skyrockets. So these things are kind of inseparable. They go together, and COVID makes it the vulnerable most at risk. So with all the focus on lockdowns and masks and all the rest, and I think it's important to take care, especially of our most vulnerable people, and to not spread this thing and cause more deaths and destruction. And at the same time, I want us to always remember the critical importance of the terrain, of our own health, because statistically, your odds of death if you get COVID are radically different depending on how healthy you are. So if we focused more on nurturing health rather than on fighting disease, we would have a healthier population and we would have a healthier future to look forward to. And the thing is, with most modern drugs and surgery, we treat symptoms, but we actually cause side effects, and we make the overall body less healthy in many cases than it was before. With healthy diet and lifestyle, the only side effects are good ones. For example, the Ornish program, which is the only lifestyle-based program to actually be covered by the big insurance companies in the United States for heart disease reversal. It's been proven to reverse heart disease more effectively than drugs or surgeries. And the Ornish program doesn't just help your heart. When you follow the pillars of the Ornish program, you actually get a healthier heart, but you also have lower risk of cancer. You also have lower risk of Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. You also have a likelihood that you're going to have stronger emotional connection and more love, more joy, more peace, more satisfaction in your life. And this isn't just an opinion. This is what's been reported in medical journals and studies from people who've done the program. The 4 pillars of the Ornish program, by the way, are eating a whole foods, plant-centered diet, essentially vegetarian, so it's eating well with lots of vegetables and fruits and low in sugar and junk food and animal products. Number 2, it's healthy emotional ties and relationships and connection, having people you can talk to and confide in and share with. And honestly, you get results whether you are in a bowling league, whether you're playing online card games with somebody you care about, or whether you're like in a support group bearing your soul and sobbing your guts out about your childhood. So all of these things can be beneficial. The bottom line is people need to feel a sense of belonging and connection. And then number 3 is stress reduction. And that means you have some form of inner peace, contemplation, religion, faith, some way that you can create a sense of connection to a purpose greater than yourself. And then the 4th pillar is exercise. You got to move, you got to flow, you got to use it or lose it. And so when your cardio is flowing, when your blood is pumping, that is good for every cell in your body. So again, the basic pillars: eat better, love more, stress less, move more. That's it. Follow that recipe and you'll have a healthier heart and a healthier life. So in my work, I'm passionate about sharing this message with as many people as possible. And 10 years ago, I founded Food Revolution Network with my dad and now colleague, John Robbins. Our mission is healthy, ethical, sustainable food for all. And we're working with people all over the planet to try to share the truth about food, where it comes from, why it matters, what the latest studies are really telling us, and also to help people apply it. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, they do not care a heck of a lot how many books you read, how many seminars you attend, how much you know. They care what you eat and how you live. And so that's why it is so powerful and so critically important to put the latest learnings of science into action in your life. So this isn't just theory, it isn't just talk, it's what you eat and how you live. Now, the other thing that I think is critically important for us to remember is that not everybody has access to the same resources and the same opportunities when it comes to food and health. So some people statistically are living in poorer communities. And statistically, if you live in a poorer community, or especially if you don't have much resources, you are more likely to depend for a lot of your calories on junkier foods that are more likely to be recipes for long-term illness. Children in schools are fed what the schools provide to them in the school meal programs, and they don't have a lot of say about that. So if they get addicted to junk food early in life, it's going to be very hard for them to break free. So I'm interested in helping to create a society. We make it easier for everybody to do the right thing. You shouldn't have to be rich. You shouldn't have to be a PhD expert. You shouldn't have to spend your life reading medical journals to be able to know the truth and apply it in your life, to be able to eat good, healthy food. And the good news is that when you know what to do, you can eat really well on very little money. There's an unfortunate misnomer that healthy eating is crazy expensive, and it can be. But Whole Foods doesn't have to take your whole paycheck. You can choose to eat real, simple, wholesome food and not spend an arm and a leg for it. For example, basing your diet around legumes and cabbage and carrots and mushrooms and onions and real staples, quinoa and grains. These things do not cost a lot. They're cheaper than any restaurant meal, even at McDonald's. And you get real wholesome food. And last time I checked, by the way, cancer was pretty expensive. So was heart disease. So was feeling like crap all day long. So I'm interested in how we can save money and save our lives at the same time. So that's a bit about me. And maybe we can move to our panel now.
Thanks, Ocean. Thanks so much. Panel, we'll open it up to you.
How are we going to go about deciding who's talking when?
Oh, however you want to do it. Just jump in, put your hand up. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Oh, Robin, yes. Ocean, thank you so much for your presentation. You sound like one of my students. Okay. I'd like to add something. I'd like to add something around the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's really help people understand why what we've done to our food supply has so many unexpected effects. So I co-authored a major paper on use of natural medicine for the COVID-19 pandemic according to the phase of the infection. So the natural therapies for prevention and treatment are very different from the natural therapies when you've got the cytokine storm and try to recover. So as I looked at each of these different things, one of the areas that was really important for prevention of the COVID-19 infection was getting zinc into cells, because when zinc is in cells, that's how it can block then the replication of the viruses. So I was looking at how to do that, and there's a lot of bioflavonoids that you find in foods that get zinc into cells and are also antiviral. So that's very interesting. Then I started looking at foods that are grown with chemicals versus foods that are grown with natural fertilizers. And it turns out many of these antiviral bioflavonoids and carotenoids are not only lower in chemical grown foods, some of them aren't there at all. So what we've done is we made our society more susceptible to infections. There's a natural protection we get from plants, because the plants have in themselves these molecules, these bioflavonoids and carotenoids, to protect them from viruses. Or they protect us from viruses too when we eat them, except now with the modern food supply, the molecules aren't there anymore.
Okay, that makes it more complex.
Ocean, thanks for your words. I think for me, what I'm dealing with directly is the undercurrent of greed in America. So whatever happens, to the plants in terms of fertilization, over fertilization, like them becoming sterile, the nutrient count, et cetera, what you just mentioned. For me personally, before even the food, it just comes down to greed. And it's either people store housing for themselves, so fear, right? So all this COVID, what's happened is all these comorbid things of anxiety, depression have become exacerbated because we don't have that connection like what you're talking about, just that social interaction. And even though Zoom is great and has lent itself to look at our group, we would never have been able to come together like this. And food is such the love element. It is the element. I mean, if you eat at Bob Andoni's house, that it's packed with love. And that is what nourishes us more than, XYZ sort of fertilizer, this, that, whatever. It just has to come from a place that's not greedy. And I don't know how to tackle this issue. I'm glad that you are. But if you have any thoughts, I'd be happy to hear.
Well, first of all, I think that's one of the reasons why my dad's story resonates for so many people, is that he made a clear choice to walk away from a company that was in today's dollars valued at maybe $1 billion, because he didn't want to spend his life selling a product that might contribute to more people like his Uncle Bert getting sick. And, I think that we as a society have kind of made money more important than human life, than the earth itself, than the welfare of animals. I think we've made it the bottom line, so to speak. And yet we all know that it's not. Money is a tool, and it's a very useful tool. And anybody who doesn't have enough struggles with that and feels generally some degree of suffering, or a lot of suffering with that. But at the same time, studies show that beyond this point, once people have a certain amount of their basic needs met, more money does not equal more happiness. And yet we live in a society where glorification of conspicuous consumption and more is seen as like the be all end all and the purpose of life. I don't think it is. I think the purpose of life is connection, is contribution, is making a difference, is growing, is learning, is loving, and being healthy. You got to have your health. I mean, there's the old saying that a person with their health has 1,000 dreams, and a person without it has just one dream, and that's to get their health back. So that is a source of passion for me. I think that we would also be ill-advised, though, to blame the greedy without looking at the system that we're in, that essentially rewards certain behaviors and not others. So, you're rewarded if you can outsource pollution. If you're that's raising animals for human food, you're rewarded for cutting corners, even if it means treating the animals terribly, because there's no financial incentive to care for future generations, or to treat animals ethically, or to not spew carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So we have to address these issues, I think. And my passion is I want to see lots of healthy profits made from healthy food.
Right. Ocean, could you keep going with that? Because that's where I wanted to move us anyway, to this idea of incentives. You know, how do we put pressure on these systems? I mean, we you know, obviously we're in a capitalist economy, and there's this whole movement of conscious capitalism. I think there's a gathering of more and more. That we just had a session earlier this morning on the movement of B Corps, or in the United States and around the world. So there is some momentum there. But can you talk a little bit about where those incentives are and how we might promote them?
Sure. Yeah, I think B Corps are a wonderful step. I think that for everybody who is in any kind of business to always be thinking about the bottom line. Some people call it the triple bottom line, you know, people, planet, profits, or it's like, how are you taking care of your own people within your company, creating a healthy, safe working environment? How are you contributing to the world around you? How are you contributing to consumers and ethics and integrity and values, and of course being profitable, right? And hopefully we find ways to do all that. Ultimately, I think that's one of the roles for government, is to create some incentives for folks to do the right thing. You know, there are a lot of different opinions about what economic systems make the most sense, but I think that we certainly need to stop subsidizing the wrong stuff. In the United States, just coming back to food for a moment, we have tens of billions of dollars a year in taxpayer money that subsidizes commodities crops, which essentially brings down the price of high fructose corn syrup and Wonder Bread and white flour products. And you know, Twinkies has 14 subsidized ingredients in it. But it doesn't bring down the price at all of whole plant foods. It's bringing down the price of feedstuffs for factory farmed meat, genetically engineered soy and corn in particular, but it's not bringing down the price of broccoli or carrots or onions or mushrooms, or, you know, the foods we should be eating more of, or nuts and seeds. Those are called specialty crops, and they're not considered staples, so they don't get the subsidy money. And so, but factory farm meat gets tons of it. And this is one of the reasons why Coca-Cola, for example, is non-GMO in Europe, but uses genetically engineered high fructose corn syrup in the United States. I was talking with them about this, and they said, oh, it's because we couldn't afford to you know, be non-GMO in the US because the high fructose corn syrup is subsidized in the US. So that makes it the only sweetener we could afford to use, really, right, if we're competitive in the marketplace. So as taxpayers, I'm thinking, let's stop this. You know, like, we could argue till the cows come home about whether or not the government should be involved in subsidizing anything. But if we are going to subsidize anything, shouldn't it be the good stuff that would help us be healthier instead of the bad stuff that makes us sick? Because right now what we're doing is we're creating a financial distortion where in the marketplace, it's actually cheaper to do the wrong thing. And it rewards consumers for eating junk food. And I think that's a disaster. On the flip side, we have things like food stamp programs where there's experiments where they're being value is doubled for fruits and vegetables. And what we find is that when people get double value for fruits and vegetables, they buy more fruits and vegetables and they eat more fruits and vegetables. So that's a great way strategically to help get healthy food into lower income communities. But as far as how we encourage sort of good corporate conduct, it starts with stopping rewarding the bad stuff. And then I think we need to look at how we can celebrate and support the folks who are doing the right thing, you know? And that's critically important, because most people will actually pay extra to support something that's in alignment with their values, you know, but they don't know what is. So we've got to spread that information and do that research and have it be as objective as possible, so people can bring their life choices into alignment with their values. I'm all focused on food because to me, that's one of those places where you have such impact, where every bite you take is like a vote for the health you want and for the world you want. And it sends out these huge ripples. I mean, you can vote for pesticides and farm worker exploitation and animals being tortured and climate change and groundwater being used up. and topsoil erosion and rainforest destruction. And if you want to do that, then eat some factory farm meat, or you can vote for a healthier, more ecologically sustainable future where farmers are treated well and animals are treated well and the water is clean and pure. And if you want to do that, then focus on organic, fair trade, non-GMO, local if possible, plant-strong foods grown by farmers who are regenerative in their focus, who are focused on putting more carbon back into the soil, and we can build a brighter future pretty quickly.
So thank you so much. I think this is wonderful to start this conversation, and especially around the topic of COVID. I feel like it is such a perfect springboard. We have a pandemic going on. I don't know that it's a viral pandemic. We are seeing these comorbidities. And so how can we change the conversation instead of the illness and the disease of the virus to what is really going on in the underlying health implications of our world and how this is impacting people with these comorbidities. It really is, it's an obesity problem. It's a heart disease problem. It is a health problem. And the virus has just, I'm hopeful that the virus has brought it to our attention, but we seem to be missing that point and focusing on the virus and not all these underlying conditions.
Yeah, I mean, why is it that deaths from COVID are so much higher in wealthier countries, generally speaking? Usually with a pandemic, you would expect the poorer countries with the least hospital infrastructure to do the worst. But I would suppose to you that it's because generally wealthier countries tend to eat the more industrialized diets and tend to have higher rates of obesity. And that tends to link directly to what's causing death with COVID, which, as you're saying, maybe a lot of these deaths, when you say a comorbidity, well, whose fault is it? Is it the COVID, or is it the comorbidity? Is it the heart disease or the diabetes, or is it that made somebody more vulnerable to COVID, right? So we could look at all these factors. Now, I don't want to go out and start injecting myself with COVID just because I eat well. I still think that I'd like to protect myself from harm, but I recognize that for a great many people, all of the lockdowns and all of the fear that we're living with around this virus is profoundly linked to the impact it has because of the terrain that it lands in. And that comes back to what we eat and how we live. So the number one thing you can do, I mean, I know there's controversy, should we wear masks and all this stuff. I personally do choose to wear a mask when I'm out in public, when I'm indoors with people for periods of time, those kinds of things. But I also think that that's just a precautionary measure. The cornerstone is my morning run, and eating well and sleeping well and living well. That is how you don't just fight COVID, but every other major disease of our times.
So
Right,
you're
so just a
incredibly.
little side note on that. Whoops. Sorry.
Finish.
Just a little side note. Here in Colorado, we have the 5 commitments to containment, which are wear a mask, 6 feet apart, go to the doctor if you're sick, cover your cough, whatever. And so I've been trying to push, at least through our high school and our community, the 5 foundations of health. And I think if we could get a message that goes directly in line with what we're doing for COVID, I really think it would be helpful. So it's a lot of what you said Dean Ornish had, but I did add sleep to it. So, sleep, eat, move, talk, and then time in solitude and prayer or meditation. And I think we need to partner these messages to get health in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. Thank you.
So you're remarkably articulate. Thank you so much, Ocean. So I'd like to plant a seed and ask your thoughts on it. I think the profit motive, there's nothing wrong with having a profit motive because it gets people to do the work. But the problem is it also leads into a greed problem. And as I've looked at this issue, particularly in the natural products industry, where you look at a good quality, safe, effective product versus that which is sold for the maximum amount of profit, the difference between them is only about 10%. And that 10% is spent on doing proper quality control. So if I look so much in our society, it's the extra little bit of profit that people go for that causes so much of the trouble. How do we get people back into the responsible position of, yes, it's okay to make a profit, but it's got to be done in a socially responsible way? How do we go about getting people to think differently about it, this whole issue?
Well, that's a good question. I wish I had the answer. Each person, I think, has their own journey. So we have to think on the internal level or personal level, the interpersonal, relational level, and the systemic level. So on the internal level, each of us has our own responsibility for what we think, what we discover, what we learn, how we grow, and hopefully can widen our circle of integrity so that we continue to bring our lives into congruence with our values and look at the spots where they're out of congruence and keep looking for those spots and realigning, because I think there's a potency and power that comes from that you just can't find any other way in life. But number two is interpersonal and relational, which is how we talk and interact with each other, the values we hold. You know, a lot of people think we live in a dog eat dog world, but the truth is dogs don't eat dogs, except under very extreme circumstances. And humans do not, you know, if we create a us, them, you know, take down everybody else, the way you win is by beating everybody kind of mentality, then we're going to create a world with winners and losers. And at the end of the day, a lot of folks will lose and suffer and even die because of it. But if we create new paradigms of partnership and collaboration, service and integrity and contribution, then all that can shift. And a lot of that starts with conversations, interactions, relationships, who we know, and how we hold people accountable in our lives to their own values, to their own integrity, to their own sense of conscience. And then we need systemic change. You know, we need systems that support and encourage righteous behavior so that more people will make wise choices, so more companies will make wise choices. And that comes back to a bottom line sense, you know, what do we as a society value? You know, as a human race, what do we value? What do we stand for? You know, and I personally want that the world that my children live in is brighter, more beautiful, more healthy, more alive, more creative than the world I was born into. And, you know, I think most of us want our kids to be safe, to be able to, you know, play outside safely, to have clean air and clean water, to grow up with respect and dignity, and to be able to practice their religion or their faith, to have their own values safely, you know, and yet we live in a world where so often there's persecution, there's bullying, there's violence, there's toxins, and I think we all want to try to change that. So my challenge to everybody who's with us right now is to ask yourself, how can I be a part of the solution? How can I be the change? You know, Gandhi said we must be the change we want to see in the world. It's so easy to gripe and complain about all the things that are wrong out there. And believe me, there's plenty of them, I know. But at the end of the day, the real question is, what are we going to do? And how will we be a part of hopefully making things a little better on this planet?
Bill, we have a couple. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I have a quick question, Ocean. I really respect your idea of supporting these movements through each bite. And I think that's a really effective way to educate people. But I'm really curious from like the subsidizing perspective, how we can really support like, you know, subsidizing small farms and organic farming and supporting regenerative ag. I know Zach Bush does a lot of work with that, but is there anyone like from a passionate student perspective, like how can we get involved for voting or for you know, other little daily acts besides just the bite, that, you know, the fork aspect? Yeah, what can I do to spread that mission?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, there are so many opportunities. Speaking again to food specifically, you know, of course, what you eat, walking your talk and eating it is critically important. And then you can spread the word socially by sharing healthy food with loved ones and bringing healthy food along to gatherings. If you're going to a party, bring some healthy stuff, then you've got something to eat, but you can also share it with others, sharing recipes, sharing resources, sharing books and videos and programs and seminars with people you love. So that's one way that it spreads. And then systemically, I I mean, if you want, depending on the scale you're at, I mean, if you're a parent and you've got kids, then think about school meal programs and how healthy are they or not, and what can you do there. If you're in a workplace, what kind of food is served in your workplace or involved with any institution? And is there anything you could do to make it healthier and to be proactive about that? You can talk to folks, and it's amazing how often one individual can change a whole system because they just take the time to get engaged, to find out what the roadblocks are and what can be done about it. And then, you know, obviously, if you're, no matter what kind of voice you have, you can use it to talk about things that matter. So if you have a newsletter, if you have a platform, if you have an audience, even if you make a product and there's a package labels, like how can you use that to try to get something good out in the world? So I'm always an advocate for finding your own place of advocacy. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and I think there are 8 billion parts to play in making things better. But we all have a niche and an audience of some kind and a voice of some kind, and using that is your sacred responsibility, I believe. So get informed, spread the word, and then take some action. Lobbying is important too, of course. Political leaders, as bought and sold as they have been by established corporate interests, they also still do depend in many countries on votes. And so letting them know what you think and feel can be important. Setting up meetings, especially on the more local level, but even at the national level, if you can, with your representatives, can make a tremendous difference. They actually do spend a lot of time meeting with constituents, most political leaders do. And then of course, voting, and you know, vote your conscience and your values. That needs to be said, you know, for sure. And speak up about what you do and why. It all matters.
Great, thank you.
Sure. I'll say one of my heroes is Cory Booker, senator from New Jersey. And he's been taking on the food issue in a pretty deep way. He introduced a bill to ban factory farming in the United States. He's been very strong advocate for organic farming, regenerative agriculture. His partner, Rosario Dawson, narrated the film The Need to Grow that we produced this last year, which is about regenerative agriculture. And he's just very passionate about that. And it's really wonderful to have a champion in Washington who's advocating for a lot of the things we believe in.
I'd like to answer one of the questions that came up about food deserts, and just a little personal story. We need to have community grow food patches. Any piece of empty land, you can make it grow food. And I had a really strong validation of that. So I have blueberry plants. I've got a dozen blueberry plants I've been growing for over 30 years. They're wonderful blueberries. Some new people moved in next door with 4 little girls, cute little girls. And I got the little girls to come and help me maintain the blueberry plants, but more importantly, pick the blueberries when they were ripe. Their mother said a few days later, she said, I can't get my kids to eat the fruit when I send it to them at their school lunch. It comes back with fruit in the school lunch, unless it was blueberries they picked. If they pick the blueberries, they eat them. Wow. So I think getting people to start actually growing foods themselves will start changing the relationship with food. Because fundamentally, when we look at all these various factors, if people aren't eating real food, their health will never be as good as it could be.
Absolutely, it's true. And blueberries are a good example. You know, there are studies showing that people who eat blueberries have 2.5 more years of healthy brain function. Just looking at Alzheimer's as an example. And, you know, there are, yeah, they're just wonderful. And they're good for fighting diabetes as well. Powerful little ones. And they're pretty good tasting too, I think.
There are questions in the chat box, but there is no time on the clock. So I apologize for not being able to get to those questions. I do. I want to end with a thank you to Ocean for leading the discussion, and to all the panelists as well. You gave us a gentle and I think maybe a central message. You said it's easy to gripe and complain, but what we really need to do is act. And in that, and there's so many ways to do that. one idea is this session here is being recorded, and it will be published probably in a week or two, and it very well could be used in your schools, with your colleagues, with your friends, perhaps just the introduction by Ocean, or perhaps the whole discussion as a prompt to inspire others to engage in this conversation. This kind of discourse is fundamental to action. We have so many ideas, so many levers to pull as they relate to systems, but the people pulling those levers are individuals, and that is going to require the same courage, as I mentioned, that I think, Ocean, you have shown us in the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to the panelists. And I encourage you to look at other sessions that are coming up that will be related to this, including Dr. Gregor, who will have a session Thursday afternoon. Bill, is that right?
Yeah, Thursday at 1:35 Mountain Time.
Right. Okay. So once again, Ocean, thank you so much. Thanks for your good work. Thanks for spending time with us. Thanks to all of you. And yeah, and I am heading to a homemade vegetable soup with brown rice.
Righty. Thank you all so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.